Now, let's get straight into the news this week. Joining me from Washington, D.C. to cover off on all the big stories out of the U.S. is Adam Creighton, Washington correspondent for The Australian. Adam, thanks for talking to us today here and joining us on the U.S. Report.
Thanks, James.
On to everyone's favorite hot-button topic, no, not abortion, but gun control. Vice President Kamala Harris visited the site of the Independence Day Highland Park mass shooting and delivered a bit of a Bidenesque word salad while she was there.
We got to take this stuff seriously as you are, because you have been forced to have to take it seriously.
Now, I know you're taking it seriously because she's taking it seriously and I'm taking it seriously, but a quick twofer for you. Will the Democrats be able to use gun control after all these horrific mass shootings to their advantage to save at least some of the furniture in November? And is the incoherent Kamala Harris Joe Biden's best insurance policy to keep him in the job?
Well, firstly, James, just on the gun issue, I don't think so. I mean, the reality is the Congress has just passed a gun reform already, and I think there's very little appetite to do more there. And, of course, the shooting here that we've just witnessed is absolutely tragic. But I think the reality is that this occurred in a state, Illinois, which has some of the toughest gun laws in the country. And I think that illustrates to ordinary Americans that simply lifting the laws, changing the laws here and there, which is all that could possibly happen, is actually not going to stop these shocking tragedies. I think the problem is more profound and deep-seated. So short answer, no, I don't think that Democrats will be able to make much inroads from that. It's also worth mentioning that Democrats themselves didn't actually do anything nationally on gun laws since 1994. So they're very reluctant to touch that issue. And just on the question of the vice president, look, I mean, she's performing absolutely terribly. So she's no insurance policy for the president. But it is worth pointing out that the president recently has just become so unpopular that Kamala Harris is actually slightly more popular now than Joe Biden in terms of the latest Harvard-Harris poll. And just also on the vice president, I mean, she has very little on her schedule. I mean, as a journalist here, I get the daily schedules of the president and the vice president. And I must say, the vice president's schedule almost every day has absolutely nothing on it. So I don't know what she's doing. She could be using that time to be preparing her lines more. That's what I would recommend.
Yeah, well, we're going to have a great pollster, John Zogby, on in a little bit to talk about these poll numbers, but I want to shift gear and talk about something that we can all relate to at the moment, which is inflation. I'm going to play you a clip that highlights the impact soaring prices are having on American families. Take a listen.
I live in Cherokee, Oklahoma, which is a pretty rural area. Overall, I'd say we probably spend close to $60 to $100 a week more on gas.
The kids and I had planned on just doing a road trip out to Tennessee. And as we got closer to it and the gas prices kept rising, it just became one of those things where it's like, I don't know that this is going to work.
Adam, you wrote a great column in The Australian this week that says this goes far beyond just the pain at the pump. You live in Washington, you live in America. What's it like? And is the country now really in a recession, a real classic recession?
Well, just firstly, on living in Washington, it's extremely expensive, certainly a lot more expensive than I remember it 5 years ago. I would say on average, things here are 30% more expensive than Sydney, I would say, which is our most expensive city back home. I mean, just to give you an example, to order a Big Mac meal rather through Uber Eats is $25 here in Washington. So that's about 36 Australian dollars just to get your fries, your Coke and a Big Mac. So that's just one example. But the point on the focus on petrol prices is fair enough. This is a car-mad country. It's a big country. But there are other things that have gone up even more, such as airfares. I mean, 66% in just 2 months. I mean, that has priced swathes of this country out of domestic travel. And there are families, of course, all across the country who want to visit each other, friends want to visit each other, but lots of people essentially now can no longer afford that. So it's not just the car travel, it's also air travel. And the mortgage rate too. I mean, it was 3%, 7 or 8 months ago, and now it's almost 6%. And house prices have barely moved. So essentially, the cost has doubled of buying a home, which is a tragedy, of course, for many families. So it's not just gas prices, if you like, to use the American vernacular. It's everything across the board.
So then this would be a real squeeze on the American middle class, which I suppose is why I wasn't surprised to see a poll this week which showed that 88% of Americans think the country is on the wrong track. Now, that's a historically high number, but I mean, when you're paying $35 for a Big Mac meal, I can understand that. Is there any way for the Biden administration to turn this around, or do people just go through 2 more years of being utterly demoralized until they get a new president?
Well, look, I think the latter is more likely. I mean, I do feel a bit sorry for the president because there's very little that he can actually do to turn inflation around. I mean, he can't get anything through Congress, basically, has an extremely small majority there. His whole agenda has fallen apart. Inflation's the problem of the Federal Reserve right now, and it's a function, if you like, of decisions that were taken a year ago and 2 years ago from the pandemic in terms of the huge increase of money that was injected into the economy. So, look, there's not much he can do, but I mean, he should try to change the rhetoric. I mean, the left flank of his party is, I mean, as you mentioned earlier in your introduction, they're constantly saying, crazy anti-American things, which I think are very unpopular with ordinary American families. And they've been demonising quite sensible measures, I would say, such as in Florida, where they've changed the law. They introduced a new law to stop the discussion of sexuality with very young children, which, to most people, including in Australia, I would think is very sensible. But the left is trying to make it into some horrible thing. So I think that kind of discourse on the left of the party is really making things very hard for the president.
Adam Creighton, we're going to have to leave it there. Adam Creighton from The Australian, thank you so much for your time and joining us on the U.S. Report.
Thanks, James.